You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Commit more, get more. Commit to 365 days of battle-tested, no bullshit programming, and we'll throw in lifetime access to our nutrition protocols plus a one-on-one consultation absolutely free, so we can craft you a game plan for 2025. I spent a decade smashing heads in the NFL and even longer building monsters in the weight room, so I know exactly what it takes to turn your strength conditioning goals into reality. So whether you want to learn to lift or crush the competition, Power Athlete has you covered. Commit to the cause at powerathletehq.com. Pick the program, then select Athlete Yearly at checkout to claim this limited time offer. Don't sit on the sidelines. Sign up today. Now back to the show. Hey, Ben. Welcome to Power Athlete Radio, the premier podcast in strength conditioning for any of those penguins out there or any other weird people that unfortunately have barnacled onto us that we've scraped off over the years. But seeing as this is the first podcast for 2025, took a few weeks off. Over Christmas, we had some bangers, obviously some great podcasts from the past that we decided to re-release. But last week I was out with Naval Special Warfare's Development Group, working with them. So we have a contract that we extend training and whatnot, and it involves a 5-day event that looks like Power Athlete, helping them figure out which program to follow, putting them through all the fun that everybody sees in the academy and you see in the training, but then also tacked on a jiu-jitsu seminar on the backside and brought Victor and Arash and Philippe, which was incredibly interesting. You have some of the best jiu-jitsu players in the world. You have some of the, I fucking don't want to use the word elite, because whenever I say the word elite, I think of CrossFit and people doing thrusters just screaming elite. But some pretty badass dudes, super smart, in great shape, great decision makers, and then doing jits with them was a handful because those dudes' cardio was fucking intense. So it was fun. The guys had a great time, and we were out there in Virginia Beach. Was obviously really shitty weather. Getting back and forth to Austin was never fun, but it was a great week. So we took a week off, and this week we're starting 2025 out with a bang in a 3-piece segment that I want to do with Ben about education. If you've been plugged in and have a brain, at least following social media and whatnot, there's a lot of people that do online curriculum these days. And there is almost like a rub. I feel like a lot of the online education thumbs their nose at traditional education and really what we know in terms of academia. I come from academia, so do you. As I sent you in the questions earlier, when I look back on my experience at Berkeley, I don't even think about football. I really look at going to Berkeley as a student, being a rhetoric major. I mean, the stories that I tell my kids and that I tell on this podcast really have to do with my experience as a student. The football was really lackluster. We weren't very good. I played for 3 different coaches over 5 years. Played for a tyrant of an offensive line coach in Tom Cable, and then had an old guy named Monty Clark that came in. It was just apathy was how I would best describe him. And I really look at my football career starting once I got to the NFL, and all the experiences you'll ever hear over the decade plus on this podcast usually have to do with my NFL career and me playing professional, because that day in '99 when it started, that to me is how I think of my football career. But the education that I received at Berkeley and the experiences I had from everything from, having to read 20 plus books a semester, Socratic method, sitting in a class with 800 people, looking around, and then realizing that people are videotaping it, and just it was overwhelming to say the least. But I loved it. I loved the competition, the fact that, all the information that we needed in the world was contained within a library that you had to go and dig through the stacks and, microfiche and Dewey Decimal System and all this stuff that in the last 20, 25 plus years has just fucking evaporated. That the entire world of research is aggregated in a phone. I mean, that didn't exist. I mean, I remember when I got to the, I actually was going through the process of getting ready for the draft, and my agent sent me, how super cool is this, overnighted me a box and in it was a cell phone. And I remember thinking, what the fuck am I going to do with this? Like there was no text messaging. It was just like a phone for him to call me because we had a landline that my roommate used and I used. And like, for the most part, we never answered. And so he's like, hey, I need to get a hold of you. Team's going to need a hold of you. I'm sending you a cell phone. And I like left it at the house because I thought I was going to lose it. I didn't want to turn it on. Like it was a really weird thing that's evolved. And I wonder for somebody like you who recently got their PhD, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I know it was a long process and, a daunting one. And I'm sure many times they were thinking, why the fuck am I doing this? And is this really worth it? Do me and my family really need this out of me? And I'm sure you had many late night existential moments, 3 a.m. Like, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I doing this? Do I really need this? But you persevered. You were able to get your PhD. And congratulations, Dr. Ben Skutnik.
Yeah, for sure. There were tons of moments where, because like you mentioned, so for those who don't know, a typical PhD in exercise physiology, which is what mine is in, will take typically 4 years, maybe 5 years. Now, I started mine in 2013, and I was already on a longer than normal scale, and then COVID hit. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why, but yeah, over that course, it took, 11 years or so. And actually, when I finished, the university sends an email when you graduate saying, hey, you've been here for so many days. And it was like 4,000 days. And I was just like, Jesus Christ. Like, what have I been doing?
What have I been doing and why am I here?
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, it feels nice to be done. But no, I think what you bring up is really interesting because, yeah, we deal with that all the time, right? I was already teaching. That's part of the reason why it took so long is I took a teaching job because my wife and I had our first daughter and I needed to make money. And I was teaching while, started teaching before COVID hit, teaching while COVID hit, and then afterwards. And, that was obviously a big change for universities across the nation because, the university itself, and I'm actually pretty lucky. My advisor is he's kind of an old school guy. He has a pretty romantic view of what the university is supposed to be. And his day one of his first seminar when I started school here, we talked about the university is here to create universal thinkers. And so even though you're getting a PhD in exercise physiology, like you need to know enough that you can walk into any conversation and at least be able to think well enough to participate. And I took that to heart because I think that's, when we boil it down, I think that's what the university is supposed to offer. He had us go, it was like the second week, and it was an exercise phys seminar, but the second week we went to the Lilly Library here on campus because they had an original scroll of Kerouac's On the Road. And he was like, you just got to see this. Like, this is just cool. Right. And
you're speaking to me right now. I mean, as you know, I'm a Jack Kerouac fan. Where I lived in Berkeley was not far from where he used to. I guess he was a hobo, where he would, would put a newspaper over his head. And over in Columbus and down in San Francisco, I used to work at a club that was probably half a block from the City Lights bookstore where he used to go and do his beatnik readings. So I would ride my shitty motorcycle over there early and park my bike right there. And I would go in and I would read books in the City Lights bookstore and feel like I was soaking in a little bit of that beatnik culture. And then I'd go to work, beat up drunks, throw them out, hopefully not let chicks get drugged. And then, get on my bike and I would ride home on the, across the Bay Bridge. But that beatnik culture, that like Berkeley was the epicenter of that, and to see an original manuscript of On the Road, that's cool to me. But also, and you also made a point where you said a pretty romantic view of education and university, and I almost like a gut punch because that view is now considered outdated and romantic. That, like just because you are getting a PhD in exercise phys, that doesn't relieve you from the obligation to be an educated, intelligent, well thought out individual, which has been my entire goal, my entire life. I mean, even the goal of this podcast is to educate people in performance and to help them be better versions of themselves, which should be the goal of every university and really just anybody that has kids that looks to mentor and be a better version of themselves.
Well, and I think along the way, part of the reason this kind of shift has happened is, and this is just my view, but we'll say pre-internet, right? Pre-internet, information wasn't the currency, right? You didn't get places because you knew things. You got places because you knew how to get there, right? You knew how to have the conversations with the people, how to reason your way through stuff. You weren't expected to know the thing. But then the internet came about, and especially now, it's like just having information seems to be the currency. You don't need to know much about that information. And we see that all the time. We see it in social media. And this is what I try to get my students to understand is having the information, it means nothing. Because if you can't defend it, or if you can't, critically look at it, then it's like the material aspect of the university, right? You just have stuff, but what good is that stuff, right? And so I think that's kind of how this, the more grand view that my advisor imparted on me has become as kind of this like outdated view, which is unfortunate because, that's what drew me to higher education, is that like I'm here among like world experts of all sorts of stuff. And so how cool is it that I'm 1 degree of separation from all of these experts in things, right? And they give talks throughout the year. And it's like, I don't know anything about some of this stuff that I go watch. And it's just cool to see the best in the world talk about what they're the best at, just like pro sports, right? It's really cool to see the NFL because they are the best football players in the world, right? You see it at the highest level, and the university is no different. But yeah, the students, they don't care about that now because it's, and I know your background is more in the secondary school level. That's become a conveyor belt, right? My wife, she's an administrator at a high school, and it's like, now it's just pushing kids through, and that's bled into college now, where it's like, okay, now just push them through the undergrad so they can go get their, degree in physical therapy or whatever that next degree is, which is a bummer because from 18 to 22, there's a lot of life to live. And if you're just trying to get to the next step, it's like you're missing all sorts of stuff that has nothing to do with class, right?
Yeah.
So I wasn't Division I, I was Division III. So there's a little bit of difference, but still being an athlete, it's like, I don't know if you felt this way, but there were times where you feel a little bit of an outcast, right? Because everybody else is just a student and you're a student athlete and things like that. So like, when I look back in college, it was the interactions with the students outside of class where I could find who I was, where I could kind of figure out how I'm going to go through life and kind of really make my identity, because I swam through college, but I didn't want to be a swimmer, right? You played football, but you didn't want to be a football player. You wanted to be John Wellborn, rhetoric major, blah, 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 right? But if you're so fast to try and get to the next step, you're never going to build that. And then you're going to be a shell of whatever you're going to be when you grow up. And so that's kind of, the problem with that outdated view is we're missing what the university's for. And it's to develop your universal thinking.
This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show. I completely agree. I felt somewhat robbed in my college experience for the fact that I had to invest so much time into sports. And while I was there, I didn't view it that way at all. I looked at it as playing football was the currency that allowed me to be there. The valedictorian in my high school didn't get into Berkeley. So the fact that as a 1200 SAT, 3-something GPA football player, I was able to go to Berkeley and be competitive and get into this, I felt that this was like the currency that allowed me to be there. I wasn't there because I was a great student. I wasn't great, I wasn't there to build up the university with my, amazing intellect. I was there to play football. But I looked at that as like, I don't care how I get invited to the party. I don't mind being a +1 in life. So I knew once I got there that I was going to be competitive because, one, I wasn't a dummy. And two, I was hardworking. And I realized even people that were deemed smarter than me, it was just more opportunity, harder working. And if it came down to just that issue of just being able to apply yourself. And I remember my dad telling me, when you get to college, it's the person that, one cares the most, asks the most questions, is as involved as they can. And I take this even a step back into another one of my favorite movies, which is the Dead Poet Society, where he talks about what is the Dead Poet Society. And he talks about, people that wanted to snap the marrow and suck the bone out of, or snap the bone and suck the marrow out of life. So when I went to college, that feeling of like cracking the bone, sucking the marrow, investing and like collecting everything I could through every experience was important, but I was limited because, I had to be done by noon. And for the rest of the day I was obviously athletics, playing football, get done at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, go home and, try to get my studying done. There were a lot of labs. There were courses I couldn't take. I ended up taking a pretty rad course. There was a class called Afro 142 A and B. It was in the African American Film Studies. And it was all about the black exploitation movies of the 60s and the 70s and Dolomite and all this stuff. And the cultural piece and how this affected black people and this entire fascinating course. Amazing. But it started from 3 to 4 and then the film was from 7 to 8. So people would go to the class, they go eat dinner, hang out, have some coffee, and then they'd come back and they'd watch the film. So I was able to talk to the professor and he's like, hey, here's the deal. Just come to the class, come to the movies. And what I'll do is I have study notes done that I'll give you and you can just write papers. And then we'll do some study stuff on like an off day or a Saturday or a weekend. You can come in and contribute. And I ended up taking Afro 142 A and B. Because I had done a bunch of rhetoric of comedy classes and some movies and, just some like fun throwaway courses. Extremely impactful how that stuff positioned not only the, I guess you could say like the maturation of blacks in this country and how the whites viewed, fucking cool course. And that's what I was there for. I was there to get an education, but I needed to be educated. And the only way you do that is by taking a diverse course load and putting yourself into courses that I don't know enough about this, but this seems pretty cool. I want to take it. And I was fortunate as a rhetoric major to understand a certain writing style and a certain way to analyze information, which, I've also talked about Adrian Cragen, who was the individual I spoke to on my trip when I went to Cal. He said the goal of undergrad is for you to learn to read and write and think to the best of your ability. And if you don't do it in that order, you run into trouble. And that piece of being able to go through and then all of a sudden as I kind of developed this superpower, let's say, to be able to read, pull out information, have thoughtful discussions, I just started applying it in new ways and it ended up serving me very well. But I allowed myself to create this interesting experience that even when I drive my kids to school in the morning, I talk to them about it and they were like, I can't believe college was this impactful for you. And they were like, you talk about it all the time. And then it was funny in prep for this, I was talking to my girls this morning and they were like, you never talk about playing football in college. And I realized that I was like, they're like the only stories I've ever heard about the NFL. And I'm like, because I almost forgot that I played football in college because the education that I was there for was what I was really like. I never thought I was going to play in the NFL. I just didn't know anybody who played the NFL. It didn't really seem like something that was attainable. I was there to get a degree. I was going to go to law school and I had my entire thing and this was the currency I needed to get there. And then obviously it took me in a different direction. But the value of education to me cannot be I rage against the dying of the light when I hear this, traditional education's dead, universities are dead. And you hear it all the time that it's broken. It's a broken system. And I would love, now everybody's not destined to go to college. I wouldn't expect everybody to, but
Yeah.
I would love everybody to be able to have the same experiences I have. I just don't know. I mean, in terms of traditional education, like this in-person kind of structural curriculum, do you believe it's like kind of like I'm saying, is it irreplaceable? I mean, like even in this like digital world, or has it just become passé and something that's kind of like the Mount Rushmore that you put up there with your degree? It's like, well, I got it, so there it is.
Yeah, I like to think it's irreplaceable because, again, without, what I term it as like the university experience. Without the university experience, then you might as well just, like Goodwill Hunting, right? Go accrue $1.42 in late charges from the library and just read the information, right? But the university experience allows you to be, forced into a setting that is uncomfortable, right? You're an 18-year-old kid, so you're just already awkward. And now you're going to be forced to talk to other 18-year-old kids whose brains haven't fully developed, and you have to reason through these issues, right? That forced discomfort is necessary for growth, right? And unfortunately, those spaces for those conversations, in some universities at least, are being pulled away, right? And so if we pull those opportunities away, then sure, the university is a throwaway, right? Because you're not challenging people. And I was actually we just started the semester this week, so I was talking to my class about it this morning about, they're all pre-PT, pre-med, pre-whatever, pre-health. And I told them,
what age groups, like where they at in their journey, upper division, lower division?
So like junior, senior, right?
So they're kind of in their upper division, like they have an idea of what they want to do.
Yeah, and they're all getting ready to start applying to grad school and all that kind of stuff. And I let them know that, hey, I'm going to say the quiet thing out loud, that the course you're in right now is a weed out course, not for our major, but those programs are going to look at this course and how you do in this course to see if you get in, and they all get like, oh no. And it's like, but I tell them, it's like, man, this is like if you ask me how the weather was going to be and it's supposed to rain, I just say, oh, not bad. And you go out and you get soaking wet. You're going to get rained on no matter what. I'm telling you right now, though, to bring your fucking umbrella, right? Like it's going to happen and you're going to have to deal with it no matter what. And I like to think some students get put off by that, but it's like, hey, I'm telling you now, so then you can do everything you can. Because like you said, the beauty of the university, there are endless resources here, endless resources at university to get whatever you want to get. The amount of work you're going to put in is up to you. But again, if you want to go see the world expert on something, go fucking sit outside their door until they come out and say, hey, I'd love to talk to you about this. Right.
Yeah. I had Ken Jowett, who was Reagan's advisor to Russia, was a university professor. I took his class. I actually went to him for, I was writing a rhetoric paper on fear, and went to him and asked him for a, political historic moment in time that I could use as my example. And he gave me McCarthyism, which was fascinating. And then I lived in the dorms with Bob Woodward's daughter. Can't remember her name for the life of me. From Woodward and Bernstein and, all the President's Men and the Nixon deal. And he came and spoke and we got to hear him. And it wasn't until later I was able to kind of put two and two together when he was like, I was a 27-year-old ex-naval intelligence officer who decided to become a reporter. And my first case was the Nixon case, and my confidential informant was the number 2 guy at the FBI. And I remember like years later, I was like, oh, he was a CIA plant. Like, I mean, it was like that was the cool stuff that if you didn't know what was going on, like, the old adage from the movie Yes Man with Jim Carrey, where he just says yes to things and he finds himself in these things. I feel like a lot of times in college, like, you go by a bulletin board. I mean, it's different now, obviously, with, social media and whatnot, but there were these huge bulletin boards all over Sproul Hall, and then you'd get a Daily Cal, they'd hand them out, and there was always like so-and-so speaking, so-and-so, and you'd see these kind of like sandwich boards. And a lot of times, if there was an opportunity to go, I like to go, and I got to sit on some really cool stuff. I mean, there were, Nobel Prize winners. There were people that discovered elements here, and they would give these talks, and you could show up and listen. And I remember my dad, like when I would call and tell him, he was so jealous. He's like,
Yeah.
like, tell me, like, can you take notes? At the time there was no way to record it, but like that was the experience that I think he wanted me to have. And I look back and I'm glad that I did. When I look at this NIL situation that's going on with a lot of these college athletes, they're not there to be college athletes anymore. You're like this is a farm league for the NFL. You're being paid. The school's getting you in. These kids are jumping in the transfer portals. I mean, my question whenever these kids go in the transfer portal is like, are you ever going to get a degree? How are you going to get a degree? What if he had a major and you got to jump into this one and this? Are you going to graduate from this? I mean, these are questions that I've tried to ask that nobody's asking. What do you mean? We're going to pay this kid $8 million to come play football. Is he going to get a degree? I don't know. He's going to be rich. Who cares? And for me, I feel that's vapid. That's fucking shitty. And that's kind of bastardizing and putting traditional education in these places. These great centers of learning where people come and they, hopefully become better versions of themselves, and just making it a way station for a kid to, make a few bucks so he can win a bunch of football games and then go on and maybe have a professional career.
Well, and even there, though, you went through the process. At some point, they're going to take a Wonderlic test, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, even if you're going to go to the next level, at some point, whatever the subject matter is, you have to be able to think better than anybody else doing. That's how you'll succeed, right? You talk all the time on here about the reason you were good is because you recognize patterns of your position, right? So you thought about it. You didn't just simply think, okay, it's a run block, pass block, right? You took the time to critically analyze what you're doing. So that's what gets me about it. I love that the student athletes are getting paid now. I think that's great, right? Good for them.
I agree. We lived so far below the poverty line that, and the way the NCAA treated us, if they had just treated us a little bit better, this would have never happened. They just treated us. I mean, we were so far below the poverty line that I remember like guys being like, hey, the welfare people make more money than us, $740 a month, and dudes are eating chicken nuggets and, top ramen at the end of the month. And then the university and NCAA going, I don't know, can't help you. Fuck off.
Yeah. And so that's the thing. It's like, I love that they are getting paid, but I don't love that they're missing out on things that will still help them in their sport. I love that they're getting paid. Okay. I think that's great. But I think in that process, they're being dishonest about what intangible skills they will need. And that's still thinking. Wherever you go, thinking is going to take you further than somebody who can't think. So that's my only frustration. Yeah, like you said, it's always been around. Athletes have been told they can't do these majors because the classes meet at certain time. Like that's always been going on. But now with the money involved, it's to a higher degree because now it's like, well, we're paying you, so now you have to do all of this. And, I just don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of changes that need to happen. But one of the institutions I was at, the athletic department was actually talking about starting their own in-house academic program for the athletes. And that I don't think is an isolated thought. I think a lot of universities are discussing what that looks like. And that way, that will drastically change what the university is. Because then
I agree. I think the worst thing you can do is segment the population. Here's this guy who's a professor giving me cheat rules, cheat codes. Yeah. And he's like, never use football as an excuse when you go in there. I want you to, pretend that you are a student, instead of athlete student, which is how this really fits, but really a student athlete. And he goes, you will get a lot farther. Don't ask for anything special. Like, don't ask for special treatment because you're a student athlete. And he goes, they'll see that you're a big white dude. If you're well-spoken and you're educated, they're going to be more than happy to, extend courtesy. Go to office hours. Make sure you know your professors. Make sure you know your TAs and your graduate students. Like, do the right thing. Embrace yourself and immerse yourself into this experience. And was probably the greatest cheat code that I was given. And it's wild. I mean, I was 18 years old. I mean, it's 30 years and I still remember the professor's name and I still remember the conversation because it was that impactful to me. I don't know if the kids today are given that because, all of a sudden the NIL deal is very public. I see these, I saw these UT football kids driving around Lamborghinis. I mean, we didn't like, It's just completely different. They step on campus and everybody knows their name, and they also know, as university professors, there's this weird thing like, this kid's here making money. If I, like, I'm sure there's a lot of animosity from higher education, but they also know that like football pays the bills. So if they're too, I guess you could say, rigid with these kids, that it's going to negatively affect them from up above. So it's a weird time, and I don't know how I would have navigated it. And more importantly, I don't know how any of these kids or administrators or the position you're in can navigate it.
Well, and that's the thing. It's still the Wild West to a degree. And, some universities are they're actually pretty proactive in getting resources for the students to kind of understand how money works, right? Because that's all students. The students taking student loans don't understand how money works, right? So it's like, get them to understand that. But my big concern is, the other side of the coin of how the NCAA used to be, that also protected all levels prior to that, right? You had to be an amateur in college, which means you couldn't lose that status before.
Sure.
My concern now is if you have that 5-star junior in high school and they don't have to protect amateurism anymore, what's stopping people from saying, hey, I'm going to kick you a couple $100,000 as a kid and starting that process so early, because now they can show up at college and get paid. Yeah. And so then now you have to convince a 16-year-old to care about high school when he's making any amount of money, right? It's just like, they
where does
need
it end?
To rein it in. Yeah.
But no, I think I'm sad I missed it, because the fact that these college kids are probably making more than the pros. I mean, I know they are. I mean, these college kids are making more than I made on my first contract. So they're making more in 1 year than I probably made in my first contract. So, I mean, I appreciate their ability to make money. What's frustrating for me is that they always had this money out there. Why were they acting? I mean, so like it's bothersome that they were so cheap with us. I mean, to the point where like, hey, I'm missing my sock. Well, you got to find it. You got to bring in old socks to give you new socks. Like treating like, every dollar, anything they did was like pulling it out. And now all of a sudden they're writing these kids big checks. It's disingenuous. And I'm sure, as former players, we're like, I've never been part of the generation where it's like, well, in my generation, you guys this, because I heard it from the older guys. You guys were treated way better. But seeing this today, I'm glad for a few things. I'm glad that I kind of grew up in this mix. I saw something the other day where they talked about a generation between Gen X and millennials. That's just kind of like grew up in analog, but yet we're exposed to digital pretty soon. And I've like lived in both ones. I grew up without a cell phone, family home, but yet I've seen the rise of computers and this. I mean, I've lived in this generational thing. I don't know if the microscope of social media and all that's on these kids, it can't be beneficial for them as students. And the problem that I think of is that I cherish so much my experience in higher education and getting to go and just being a student and unbuckling from the athlete part and going in and having conversations where people don't treat you different, and professors that are demanding. Like I brought up Socratic method. I mean, a bunch of my rhetoric classes, hey, you have to do this reading. We'd come in and they'd start asking questions, and if you didn't answer the question or it was obvious that you had not read what was required, he would ask you to leave and be like, well, you're not here today, and I'm going to mark you absent. And if you get 3 of those absents, you fail this course. Like that was the greatest fucking motivator of shame and seeing somebody get shamed out of class. I mean, today they would probably be on social media and making this big brouhaha and going to the administrators and I'm paying this money. How dare you tell me to leave a course? Well, you did not do what was required. Straighten the fuck up and go do what's required and contribute, because these other people here have, and you're pulling it down. I will never discount that experience, and I'm sad that more people don't have it.
Well, and it's interesting because I'm a first generation throughout my entire family, and so first kid to go to college, first kid to graduate college, first kid to go beyond, right? And there's a big push now, which I think is good, to recognize those students, because I tell my students in my little intro lecture, my example of what college was watching Van Wilder. I was like, oh, this is going to be sweet. This is gonna be awesome.
Dude, I watched Van Wilder and I remember thinking, God, I should have gone to Arizona State.
Yeah. And so but then I got there, and originally I was going to be a math major, and I found out, there's like, oh, there's no attendance policy. And it's like, oh, that's awesome. I'm going to party all night. I'm not going to have to go to class, but they didn't tell you, but we're going to have a quiz every day, and you better be in class to learn it. And so, like, I get it. I get being unprepared. But what I hate about the current narrative around it is this idea that they're incapable to rise up without all of this extra help, right? So my big thing is, let it be known, these are all the resources you have. I'll tell you where they are, because maybe you don't know they exist, but it's like you said with your professor telling you, you don't want to be treated like a football player. It's like, don't treat these students, these 18-year-old kids, like they're incapable, right? They're capable, but if you never have them do it themselves, well, then they're never going to learn how to do it themselves, right?
Well, but part of this is technology's fault. If we're going to put blame on this, like I remember, writing a paper early on, and it required a bunch of research, and then be sitting there in class and being like, I guess we got to go to the library. And when we were kids, my mom used to take us to the library, and we'd go read books. And I've told the story about when I wanted to run faster, I went to the library and found out a book on speed and did a bunch of downhill running. And that was the place that we would go to the library. And once a week or on rainy days, my mom would take us, and we'd sit and have to read a book, and we'd get to bring 2 or 3 home. And if we didn't bring them back, we were in trouble. But going to the stacks, which is what they called at Berkeley, the stacks where all the information was, going in and then, navigating the written system, it was very, very basic. Like, I remember, this is going to totally date me, I remember the first time I had to email a paper. That was pretty wild. I remember handing in papers, like printing them out and physically handing them out. And then I remember a professor or a TA or grad student handing us these slips with like this like email address that had like 7 steps that I had to do to send this thing. And it had to be by this point to email this paper. And I remember thinking like, this is never going to catch on. This is the dumbest thing ever. But going to the stacks and like sitting there and trying to like glean out all this information and then finding what you're needing and then almost like keeping it tight to your vest, being like, fuck, I don't want to share this with anybody because now everybody's going to know what I'm writing my paper on. And so then people would be like, oh, did you do any research? I'd be like, yeah, I didn't really find what I was looking for. But now, these kids can sit in class, hit ChatGPT, listen, have AI translate everything that the professor is saying, ask for references in this, and all of a sudden it pulls it up. There's no 3 a.m. I got to go to the stacks and get this done. Everything is done within the confines. And I wonder if because we have tech-enabled people so far that we have almost, and maybe the analogy being is like, you go to the grocery store and get the food and people forget how to growing food. That we don't really know how to hunt anymore. And more importantly, you don't know how to be creative and find the information you need. And like the feeling of finding the exact piece you need and then pulling it out and using it was like such like an overwhelmingly like, fuck yes, I got this done. Now I can just do it from Google and, ChatGPT and AI and all these other things that are available to me. So I don't know how, people don't do that anymore. I can't imagine they would because it's archaic, but like, how do you extend people the mentorship to go through the process to actually find what you're looking for and make it a little harder and not grease the groove as well?
Yeah, I think, and this is kind of the exciting part of the challenge, is that it forced us as educators to get more creative. The assignments had to change. It couldn't be, simple papers anymore. Well, all that information's out there. So the term is metacognition. We are forced to teach students to understand how they learn. So learning how you learn, that's metacognition. And so now that's more apparent in all of our courses, or it should be, right? If you're trying to stay ahead of the curve. And that's been at the heart of this big change. So, you're probably familiar with like Bloom's taxonomy, right? Yes. We can essentially take out the bottom 2 steps because technology is going to take care of all of that. We don't need to recall anything because it's on call all the time. So now we just push everything towards the top. Now we have to create, and people can say, well, you can go ChatGPT and create it, and you can, but I still don't think AI requires very specific prompts if you want to really create something. Right?
And I can read something and know if it's done AI. Like like there's certain mannerisms, the way it's written, the way it's transposed. Like I can, I use ChatGPT and some of the AI tools as editors for my writing. I still sit down, I write all my information. It's just the bottleneck for me was always the editing piece. I have to like step away. I was laughing thinking about I'd get home from practice and I'd have to write papers, and I'd get done, let's say 2 or 3 a.m. And then my deal was I would always get up and like go walk around the block for like 20 minutes just to kind of clear the air, like get away from it a little bit. And then I started calling a local radio station that I would listen to, right? Like I'd have like to turn the radio on. It was like some country station, and I would request songs and talk to the DJ. I'd be like, "What's up?" He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Can you play this song?" And I'd talk to him for a few minutes, and he'd be like, "Going out to John, who is writing a paper tonight, Friends in Low Places." And he would play like any of the country music I wanted to hear. And, because nobody's calling a radio station at 3 a.m. on a country station in Berkeley, right? Yeah. And then I would, go, walk around the block, listen to some country music, and then I would edit. It had to be like at least 20 minutes to clear the air. So now my editor, I dump it into ChatGPT, and there's times when I read it where I think, fuck, this is awful. I scrap it and I just go edit it myself because it sounds too, like it just has like a certain taste. It's like eating certain foods where you're like, yep, it doesn't matter where you serve this food. I know that this is going to be like Greek food. It doesn't matter where it is. I know this is going to be this. And I worry so much. And this happens too. The majority of what I'm reading, especially on like, whether it be Sports Illustrated in here, is being created through these means. And I read it, and the problem is very few people are aggregating new information. I feel like it's we're in this situation where people are just regurgitating what's already been actually put there. I mean, your analogy of going and seeing the original manuscript of On the Road, I mean, that'll never exist again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and all of that goes back to the students or people in general have to have some time in their life where they can create their voice, right? Because ChatGPT can give you all the facts, but you can sense that there is no individual voice behind this. Yeah. This is just a manila, it's beige. It's AI is just
jazz. Beige. It's like you walk into a place, like you step into an elevator and you hear jazz music, instantly you tune out and you walk out was there music in there? I don't know. It's jazz. It doesn't cause any emotion. Like ChatGPT is fucking jazz.
Yeah. And so, it does serve its purpose. And that's the thing too, is I recognize that as an educator, I'll be left behind if I try to just rage against it because it's here, right? Yeah. It's here in every aspect. And so just like you said, like we tell the students, like, if you need to use it for situations like that, editing, fine. That's no different than using spell check, right? Sure. It's the same concept.
Sure.
But maybe it's just because I have taken the time to read enough from wherever that, you develop a filter and you can read through it and it's like, this is just not it, right? It's just not it. And so, it's just an interesting challenge, but I don't know. I don't think, people are really doom and gloom about the universities going away. They're not going to go away. But I do think there's certain areas that will, because they're just not able to justify doing that, which we talked about earlier, creating universal thinkers. They're too specialized in very niche programs. And, I laugh because we see the memes about the Starbucks barista with the degree in Russian women literature or whatever. And it's like, we can laugh about that because the truth is there are some, there are some areas like that. And I mean, I see
my ex-girlfriend had an art history degree. And I remember asking her, like, what do you do with that degree? And she's like, I can work in a art gallery or I can be a barista. And that was like it. She's like, I can work in an art gallery or I can become a barista. And I did see a funny, I pulled it off of Reddit the other day, and if you can kind of see it right there, I'll get it to you. Yeah, it says, people who don't read books lead stunted lives.
Yeah.
And that 100%. Was, it's true. I mean, I've made this point before on this podcast. that I always viewed reading as having conversations with the smartest people ever to walk the planet. Anytime as I was reading through Meditations, Marcus Aurelius, which I know has become super fucking trendy. But you take a rhetoric of Stoics class, which is fucking like doing, algebra underwater. You're going through all of these different pieces, and this is also pretty wild. Seneca lived at the same time as Jesus Christ, right? So those two individuals, if you read Seneca's work and you read the Bible, it's very similar. Like it's, but one wasn't trying, and not to say that Jesus was trying to create a religion, but, when you claim to be the Messiah and, if, to be the Son of God, and you go out and you bring this out to the world and you preach this information, there's people that believe you, and he had apostles, and this thing grew. And, Christianity was a cult religion early on. And for a couple hundred years, it was, Christian mysticism. And then all of a sudden it goes to break, and, obviously Christianity takes on. But like, if you look at, Seneca's work and, the work that we know, within the Bible from Jesus Christ, there's a ton of similarity. Seneca wasn't trying to claim he was anything other than, a great thinker, a Stoic who was looking to, increase other people's understanding of life. So it's pretty interesting if you kind of like overlap. And I remember that professor, giving us that information, and then you go back, you look in a different light, and it's like, anything you say, even the same information couched in a different way, will lead to a different response. But you have to be educated enough to be able to read this and see where this sits. And the only way I got that was by, one, being in these moments and being in these conversations. And it's something that I feel, like you said, is romantic in a lot of ways. And I'm not trying to be romantic because it was in the past, but this is the stuff that shaped me. For what I see within Power Athlete and the Academy and everything that we've been doing, this is about educating people to be better versions of themselves and being able to apply a system faster so that they can create better athletes is the vehicle we've done. But it's interesting to say the least. So.
Well, and I think that's what you touched on there is also an important part that we haven't talked about yet. Part of going to university, or like in this case, we'll bring it back kind of ground level with the methodology, is so you can learn from those individuals, so you don't have to do everything they had to do to get to where they are, right? So there is some fast tracking built into education.
Sure.
And you talk about, the Stoics. That's why the Stoics, if I understand correctly, they actually wrote about the person before them. They wrote about their mentor. That's how it was all recorded, right? Which
were the Cynics. And then there was a group before them and this, and like they were all mentored into it. But so it's an interesting time in this world. Like that time is my most favorite, because it, like, the analogy that was given to me was that it was the time when the old gods had died and before the new God, where, people had lost faith in like the Roman gods and the fact that there was a God for everything, the Roman form, and like people were no longer going there. People were looking internally for salvation, and then, obviously Christianity rises, and, Jesus, who, whether or not you view him in the way that, religion has, there was a great man named Jesus Christ, probably even wasn't his name. I think his name was something else, but, taught these individuals, and it went on to create this massive religion. But that time, and the reason people always ask, like, how come the greatest thinkers in the world were born within this time frame? Because you think about Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and some of these just amazing thinkers, that this information has stood the test of time. You still read it today, and it's as relevant today as it always was. That's the thing that was most impactful for me, is reading this stuff. It's almost as if somebody came out and provided you this information today, as I created this information, would be just as impactful. So to see something that stands the test of time, and the idea is that, know thyself, be a better version. All the different tenets of this, of this practice was more about, like, you have everything within you to be great. You just have to realize it, and, be thankful for what you have, and not be envious of what you don't. Work hard, provide a better earth than what you left. Mentorship, all these things, which I felt were, to some degree, should be exposed in higher education. And maybe there was a piece where, education, and this is what I worried about with institutional education, it became such a business that people turned away from it and started going to these alternate methods, which felt like they were more authentic. And I feel that maybe like because of the rising prices, I mean, what might have cost me $12,000 to go to Berkeley is probably close to 60 now. I mean, where my brothers went to school at the Claremont schools is well over 100, and to go to Harvard in this, I mean, 4 years, these kids are going to be invested $500,000. And, these universities, the clients, or let's say I don't say the clients, but the customer is the student. The student is giving money over to be educated so that I get this degree. And there became so much focus on the degree that now, I leave Harvard, I have the degree, I put on my wall, and I can go get this job. And if you've somehow thwarted me in some way that now I'm not able to get this, then you are not helping me as the customer. And that I felt was an interesting transition.
Yeah, I think it's, well, two things. One, just as like a fun thought experiment, you talk about the Stoics. When I read them, because it is true, that stuff has stood for the test of time, but I just wonder, what else did they have to do, right? They had the same 24-hour day, right? But they don't have the technology to go.
They wear robes
down the road,
right? So they didn't wear underwear. They wear robes and sandals.
So they literally had all day to sit there and think,
and
right?
pontificate.
And so sure, when you designate 14 hours a day to just thinking, you're going to come up with some pretty profound
and
stuff.
Then they would think and talk, and then they would go to a brothel or a bar and drink wine. And argue and talk and this, and then the sun went down, and maybe there were some torches or whatnot or fires, and then you went to bed, and then you got up when the rooster crowed, and maybe went out and looked for olives. But for the most part, and then you had to make sure some city state wasn't coming to slit your throat. But yeah, you're right. I mean, like for all of our advancements in technology, right, whether it be a cell phone and here, and I mean everything that was going to make our life easier, all it's done is make people have zero time to do anything, right? Because we've been able to stack more. Maybe thinking when you don't have a lot of time. I mean, this is another one I'm nervous, and you'll see this as a father. I'm so apprehensive and nervous that my kids are never bored. Like that is, I remember my mom, I would be like, Mom, we're bored. She'd be like, you have a skateboard, you have a bike, you have balls, go outside and be unbored. And we'd go out and create games and this, and, we go outside and just punch each other in the face. We try to drown each other in the pool. We'd have ditch 'em. We'd play these games. We set up, we had hockey sticks. And so we'd set balls, like tennis balls on fire with gasoline, and we'd hit them like at each other. I mean, like the amount of crazy things we did out of pure boredom, just creating things, was where all the creativity was found. And no longer are kids bored. I mean, like they have a screen, they have this, they have TV. Like I remember like just wanting something good to be on TV and me turning it on and never being on. I'm like, I'm not watching MASH. I'm not watching Phil Donahue, and I'm not watching fucking Price is Right. Fuck this thing. And, but now like my kids turn on, I don't know if I could have resisted Netflix when I was their age. Like it's fucking endless. And like that, so shit. So we've basically eliminated any chance of boredom. And without boredom, I don't think that your brain starts working in such a way for creativity.
Well, and that's why for my wife and I, we have made it a point to make sure that wherever we live, so the place we lived at before here was on about 5 acres, and here we still have about an acre, and there's woods in the backyard, and it's because that's our way to hopefully preserve that, where it's like, hey, you can go there and just fucking explore, like get dirty, scuff your knees up, whatever. Because we just had winter break, and with a 3 and a 5-year-old, it was like, my wife and I were like, oh my gosh, what do we do? And their attention spans are like 10 minutes. So it's like every 10 minutes we're like, here's this activity, here's this. Because it is,
and then they'll turn 13 and you'll never see them again. And basically you'll turn your group chat into being roommates. So like our roommates, I joke, I call them raccoons, because I only see them after dark, and they'll come down, like after I go to bed, I'll hear them like rustling around in the kitchen, and I'll go into them and be like, oh, the raccoons are here. What are you guys doing? And they'll be like, and then they like bolt. And so my wife's like, did we do something? And then I asked my brother, and he's like, no, this is just part of life. Like they have to like separate a little bit. And like, he's like, it's just part of the deal. They become your roommates. And
Yeah.
I laughed, dude. I'm like, oh, the raccoons are down there rummaging through the kitchen, like eating chips. Right. Don't worry, it's coming.
Yeah. But the thing about it, and it kind of goes back to, giving, because I agree with you. Creativity kind of is spurned from boredom. And so what we try and do, and this is what I think a lot of adults fail to do. You mentioned how reading is very important. I think I would take that a step further to regularly reading fiction is, I think, more important than just simply reading.
Yeah.
Because again, we're in this world where information is a currency, but those great minds came upon their idea because they're creative.
Yeah.
And so I think getting a regular dose of fiction is important because then you can get lost in a world, right? Like you have to design the story tells you the story, but it's not just this linear black and white thing. It's this greater story. And so that's like what we do with our girls. We're trying to get them to get into stories, and our 5-year-old reads at very little level right now. But yeah, it's something I think about because I was the same way. I mean, I was born in '86, so full on '90s kid. And it was like, we had a couple snow days recently, and that's when my wife and I were like, oh my God, we got to keep them entertained. Whereas as a latchkey kid, it was like, hey, there's a snow day. In the fridge, there's a couple Lunchables.
Yeah.
Don't get in any trouble. But then mom leaves, call your friend, and you're playing King of the Mountain on the snow pile down the road, for 5 hours, right?
And you come back with like a bloody lip, and your mom's like, she sees it and doesn't say anything. Like that was us all the time. My mom, I asked my mom this. I'm like, when we came in the house and we were all fucked up, they're like, how come you never said anything? She's like, honestly, I didn't want to know. I didn't really want to know what you guys were up to. Now I'm like, so what'd you guys do? What are you up to? Like, I'm curious. Cause I'm like, you guys don't have any scars. There's no like you guys aren't fucked up. Like if you didn't come in. And I find a lot of times my son is like, hey Dad, can we do this? And like before I'd be like, well, go get your brother. He didn't have a brother. So like we're out there the other day and we were shooting 22s and like he was out there like trying to like, obviously shoot. And he's like, did you do this with your brothers? And I'm like, no, we didn't have 22s. We had pellet guns. And I was like, he's like, you guys go shoot all the time? Yeah. I'm like, we killed every single bird in our backyard. Any bird on a wire, we just blasted them. And he's like, how many birds did you kill? I'm like, we killed hundreds of birds. And then we would just take the birds and we'd throw them in the neighbor's yard. And he had cats, and so the cats would eat them. But yeah, I was like, I don't know, dude. We butcher, like we just outside, like we want to do, let's go kill birds. And we just go out there and shoot birds. Because my mom was like, those birds are shitting on our cars. I'm like, well, let's kill them.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's my wife and I were talking about, so she teaches in town here and there's 2 high schools, north and south. So there's like these crosstown rivalries. And I was just like, like, what's that like? We went to the north-south basketball game and it was fine. But I remember like in high school, our rivalry week was like, we would go egg their houses, TP their houses, right? Stuff like that. And
yeah, but now they got Ring cameras and they got cell phones. You can't get away with that shit.
But that's the thing. It's like back then, even if I knew they had cameras, I probably still would have did it, right? Because it's like that was the type of fun, and it's like, oh, that's illegal or whatever. But being okay with a little mischief and like searching for a little mischief, that's what I fear with my girls, especially because they're girls, right? I fear because it's like, if we talk about learning, that's where I learned a lot of stuff. That's where you learned, what you can and can't get away with, how you can and can't talk to people, like by pushing those boundaries. And because though at their age, even we're kind of protecting from that. Yeah. Then it trickles down to seniors in high school, freshmen in college, and they don't search for mischief. So then,
but if they do, but if they do, they get in trouble. Like for example, when we were growing up, one of our buddies we used to call BA, because anytime he was in the car, he was gonna like moon you. To the point where like if he was in his mom's car and you were driving by this and this, you'd like look over and he would literally bare ass against the window. Like to the point where his nickname was BA, bare ass. And like to the point where like he was driving by and like his brother had a van or whatever, and they were like just driving by with him mooning us. And my mom's like, is that kid's ass? I'm like, yeah, it's BA. It's that's what he does. Now, there's a, like, I think it's called like 62071 Facebook page here in this area. So they kind of like, it's basically a lot of Karens, as to quote my kids, just complaining about everything from this and this and this and these people here. And like the amount of parents complaining about these kids. And I remember laughing hysterically at this woman being like, I drove by these, high school boys, and I looked over and one of them had their bare ass pressed against the window. I tried to get a picture, and we need to like arrest these kids. That's indecent. And this like, I'm literally dying thinking to myself, I'm like, well done, kids. Like if I could go like buy you like if I could Venmo you some dough to get a pizza or something, I'm like, good for you keeping this alive. I'm like, BA would be fucking proud. And then they were like, this is indecent exposure. He should be arrested in a felony. And this mom was like reading this riot act, and I'm like, this is exactly how every mom's going to be. That she just didn't have a fucking voice. She just called, the sewing circle. But I was like, it's good to know that people are still bare ass in the windows. I mean, to the point where you like take it down, there'd still be the butt cheeks up, and we'd be like, God damn you, BA. And his brother and his mom, like everybody was like, it's just what he does. He just likes to show his ass.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's just it's innocent, right? Like that's the thing. But and I talked to my wife about things that do go on high school, and there are some very severe things that the high school kids do have to deal with that we didn't have to deal with. Yeah. But I think that robs them of the innocence then, because now they're hyper aware of these things. So they're trying to correct so much. And, I don't think, not to say like I'm the shining star of well-adjusted, but I think those kids fast forward to 35 years old, it's like, sometime it's going to catch up to them, And, but yeah, I don't know. I think so. Education plays a part in that. I will though, and I'm just finishing up a book that I was gonna shoot your way. It's called "Shop Class as Soulcraft," and I think of it as the spiritual sequel to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Yeah, it's a great one. It's written by a guy who has a PhD, but then he kind of bailed on corporate life, and now he runs a bike shop and fixes up motorcycles. But it's all about how somewhere like in the 80s it's split, where like shop class, wood shop, auto, all that stuff, the blue collar idea was like, that's simpleton stuff. And through it he shows how shop class and these trades are actually some of the highest thinking skills you can have, because it's like you have to actively problem solve. And,
it was the early 90s. I remember my freshman year in high school, 1990, we had shop class. It was a badass shop class. Like it was the professor, or not the professor, the teacher was actually a professional woodworker, and he went to work for them, and he had these like badass people would get cabinets and doors, and he would come in there and build them in there, and the students would help. And so his claim to fame, and I remember as a freshman, 14-year-old kid, his claim to fame was that he had hundreds of kids that he had educated that had gone on to become, like successful, woodworkers in such a way that they could, have jobs, and they built businesses. And he was in his 60s, and I remember they closed my high school, and then we consolidated into one big one. And he just was like, I'm done. They don't have a place for me to do this anymore. And I remember, like, I still have a bunch of the cutting boards and things that I made in shop class. But these guys were all like, basically they were contractors and people that were skilled at this that decided to come back and teach. And we're like, the schools were like, yeah, you can still kind of run your businesses. And it was, same thing happens in auto shop, where, kids would, bring in cars, or people would bring things in, and they would do, small things, it's extremely beneficial. But for us to learn how to weld, we had to go down to the community college, because they got rid of shop and welding at our school, and all that we had was woodworking. And that was something I always wanted, but I mean, it wasn't available. I mean, I picked it up later in life, thank God. But these are skills that people still need today. And more importantly, there was this attitude that somehow it was like beneath people to do it.
Well, and that's the thing. And what he talks about in the book, and it's a really interesting point, I think, is that those trades require you to become a master of your craft, whereas if you go the other way and you do what the traditional kind of white collar stuff, every 4 or 5 years you kind of cycle into a new job, so you never really have to master anything. And whatever the craft is like this, it's this ambiguous something, right? And so it's just interesting, because I think the mastering of a craft requires challenge. So you have to challenge the kids, but it's that conveyor belt that we talked about earlier. So I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be. I need at least 15 more years of this so the girls can get tuition remission when they go to school. And
then we'll figure it out. I like it.
Yeah.
I got a question for you. As someone who is both a PhD and a power athlete certified and is a power athlete certified coach, how do you see the balance between traditional education, specialized practical certifications like Power Athlete Academy, in preparing coaches and trainers for like real world success? And I think you're in an interesting place as a PhD in exercise physiology. You're bringing in these kids and kind of helping them. Like, how do you balance the gift of knowledge that you're trying to help them in this field, but also understanding like the practical application of how you can use this, like the theoretical versus the practical? Because I'm sure in there you have a, strength training class and, the understanding the strength training, but then understanding it from like actually practical. I mean, similar to where we have, literally hundreds of thousands of data points and having trained, tens of thousands of athletes around the globe to success, that there's certain things that are very difficult to theorize in that environment that are, these, I guess you could say, universal truths that have become, just fixed over time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think so. When I was 15, I bought my first, I bought a 1992 Jeep Cherokee, and my dad told me I had to buy it when I was 15. I had to buy whatever car I wanted when I was 15 because he was very big on, I don't know if you remember the old Chilton's manuals for.
I still have them.
Like, yeah. So he's like, you're going to buy that, and then you're going to have a year with this manual, and you got to figure it all out, because his whole thing was like, you have to figure out what you can, so then you know what you don't know to just be honest with yourself, right? And I think about that with strength and conditioning education. When students come to me and we learn about it in class, like, I'm giving you the manual. But what I found out with that Jeep, I found out that they use Toyota transmissions, and I also found out that that's about where my ability stops. But I needed to get in there and do it, right? Yeah. I needed to try and change the gaskets and stuff. And
was that the 4-liter? Was that the 4-liter motor? Yeah. Those are actually hit or miss. So those things either run for 500,000 miles or blow up in the first week.
Yeah, this was the latter. It was a rough one. But so all that to say is, I make sure that the students know that I'm teaching you the things, but this is very much, you have to do it. You have to apply it. And this is what I think gets lost a lot of times. And we've talked about it with the methodology. It's like, hey, this information is top notch, right? It is exactly what you need to know to do what you need to do, but you have to do it. You have to get out there and try, because that's how you refine and distill down what you need. And so that's where the big challenge, I think, is with education, whether it's, the online stuff or even the university. A lot of people come thinking, you're going to make me a good coach. And it's like, no, we're going to make you a knowledgeable coach. You have to make yourself a good coach, right? You have to actually get out there and coach. And it's challenging because, especially at the university, they spend a lot of money and they expect to get that job right away. But what do all the jobs require? 1 to 2 years of experience. And then they say, well, how am I supposed to get that while I'm still going to school? It's like, this kind of goes back to discomfort. It's like, well, this means that you pick up a job while you're at school, coaching at some local gym or internships or things like that. And so that's something where I do really try and help the students out, is trying to set them up with like meaningful internships, because that's the other side of the coin, is that there's all these like unpaid internships that they hinge on experience. And it's like, how is a 20-year-old kid supposed to decipher if that's going to be valuable experience or not? Yeah,
we used to have interns. We've since have kind of got away from having the interns, but I thought that was extremely valuable for them. The issue comes down to we don't have as many athletes in person. I mean, obviously the JITS guys come in, and we got a few others, but they need to be able to train people. They need to be able to take people on their journey, and that was a fun piece. Recently, I saw a clip on social media of Candace Owens. So, however you feel about her I don't really care, but it was her talking about hiring somebody from Andrew Tate's Hustler University. and that he was this star employee and he had all these skills that he'd acquired in a non-conventional way and was outworking all the people that had, Harvard degrees. Now, I realize Candace Owens is a shill for probably a lot of things, and that Andrew Tate was, this is influencer dance where all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, Hustler University for $49, you can be better than, getting a degree from Harvard. So take this with a grain of salt, but it brought up an interesting moment of thought, of clarity, that has technology in the world evolved so fast that something like a Hustler University, which is teaching you how to basically take clips and make viral content and social media and all these kind of online businesses that, won't exist if an EMP goes off or, the end of the world knocks us back to the Stone Age when China attacks, just kind of disappear. But I wonder if everything has evolved so fast that these skills that are non-conventional, that no PhD is going to be able to get up there and show you viral clips of Andrew Tate being what color's your Bugatti, and then you remix that in 400 different ways so that you can create viral clips. And that's what they do. They, at that Hustler University, they give you a bank of these clips, and these are all viral clips. You work them into your social media, and then we'll go viral, you'll go viral, and we'll all make money, which is just a really cool Ponzi scheme in a lot of ways. Well, not Ponzi scheme, more of a pyramid scheme, mid-level marketing. But has the things like this Hustler University, right? Are these skills that they're teaching people, obviously to be successful in a world that no longer favors analog, and that the traditional means of what we understand in terms of running a business, brick and mortar, or even online, that I know within these tenants, it no longer exists. That now it's just about who can create the greatest viral clip so that I can generate the most this. And then, obviously TikTok is now, they're going to ban TikTok on the 19th. So now they're trying to, do a bunch of stuff to kind of keep this thing alive. But it's so fascinating now how people are making money and the businesses, that there's no way that traditional means could even keep up with. Even you go to business school, they're probably shit, what we knew 10 years ago doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And, and that's the thing. We have to be dynamic if we want to still prepare the students to be successful. And part of that is, at least for me, it's just embracing some of that stuff, right? There are some people who are pretty staunch about, no, this is the way, right? This is how education is supposed to be. And I just try and be realistic with the students. On one hand, there's always going to be some level of continuing education. So it's the online type of stuff works. And on the other hand, I bring up, sometimes I'll talk to students, I'll bring up, and it's totally unique scenario, but it's there's the Zuckerbergs and the Bill Gates who got what they needed from school and then split. And so it's in this field especially, I'll talk to them, and I've actually had probably 3 or 4 that I can think of, students who are in the degree. And it was just hey, you're struggling with college, but you understand this training stuff. Not getting a degree, you're going to miss out on getting your CSCS because that's a requirement, but you can still be successful. You have what it takes to be successful. And I kind of coached them out of going to school, because it's just, you don't necessarily need it. If you're only doing it to get the degree, to get the certification, you're missing the point, right? Yeah. And so, I think just educators being honest about the landscape. And then the thing that we have to be honest about too is these online, even with the methodology, there's freedom in the kind of private online education where you can synthesize a lot of stuff. At my previous institution, we were accredited by the NSCA, so we had to teach based off the NSCA's guidelines. And it's not like they're horrible, but you and I both know that there's a lot of stuff that they're missing.
Well, it's because the tenets of what they've established is to be kind of agnostic of anything, where they don't throw a flag in the ground on programming or periodization or this or this or this. They just teach you what everybody else says. And actually going through that process for the CSCS and the NSCA, not to knock them in any way, but realizing that they're presenting all this information because they're expecting the individuals taking it to be intelligent enough to apply all of it and see what works. But very, very few people have the breadth of understanding to be able to look at this information and discern this out. So then what they do is they go into camps, right? Like I'm a West Side guy, right? Max, like Louis Simmons says this, or I say this, or this, or this. I mean, we've had people forever that like, because they don't, I remember my wife and I were dating. We went on a trip for a wedding. My neighbor Joe got married in Mexico, and we went with Rob Wolf. And I took Science and Practice at Skorsky, and I took Super Training, and that's what I read over the week. And
Nerd.
Yeah, seriously, nerd. Right? Like I we would go, like we would get up, like my wife wanted to go, do whatever. We go to the pool, and I just like read, and she's like, "What are you reading?" And I went through it, and I was like, I was in the early stages of like going out and teaching CrossFit football and doing this, and like people were asking me questions that I couldn't effectively answer. And that was frustrating for me because I was, like I said, I was actually training. I trained with Philippe this morning, and he asked me, he's like, how many seminars have you taught? I'm like, hundreds. And I explained to him how this thing started and what. And he's like, so you didn't really know what you were teaching? Like you weren't a black belt? And I was like, no, I was a professional athlete, so I had a black belt. I just didn't know the information that I was like, I was failing at the margins of my experience. I was teaching people what I did to be successful and what I kind of knew, but like this was a work in progress. Every time I went to a seminar, people would hit me with different questions, and I would write them down, and I'd go back and I'd research, and I realized that I had to like level up my shit so fast because people were becoming more educated much quicker. Like from the first seminar to the last, when people are hitting me with these questions, and I never want to be in a situation where I can't answer something. And if somebody stumps me, and I don't want to bullshit. I want to be like, fuck, that's a great question. I don't know. And I found myself saying that more than not. So I figured I'd go back and I would start with Zadaskorsky, read Science and Practice, and went through this stuff, and Louis Simmons West Side, and started looking at this and understanding like my experience and where it fit within this greater model so that I could present it. And, I also had more opportunities to test training programs. The CrossFit football was like the original Sea Monkey experiment. I'm going to give away free training programs and test all the theories that I have, and then I'm going to get the results from people and just give it to them for free. And then I'm going to travel and meet all the people that did it and see what worked and what didn't work. And so basically through that experience of being able to provide free information, answer questions. Talk to Me Johnny started that way. I was getting hundreds of emails, and I just started responding to people. And then somebody's like, dude, you should post that on a website. Are you crazy? Because I was sending people like emails, like people would ask questions, and I would just email them back. And then that's how the blog started, because I just started posting the questions and the answers. And, that's a very romantic view of strength and conditioning and performance and education, that I had this kind of golden moment, this opportunity to be able to go out and do this, that, I don't know how you would ever recreate it. And when people ask, how did Power Athlete and the methodology and the blueprint for athleticism and primals, and how did all this start? And I give them the origin story. I don't know how. And I just got a chance to do this for the guys at, development group, explaining to them all these pieces and how this all came about. And those guys are like, I'll take your word for it. This shit's rad. Like, we all crush it. And, we have a ton of guys there that are following the training, and the results are, all of a sudden I'm walking over and a dude cruises over to me who I don't know. And is like, hey, I've been following this program for like 7 years. Like long before I got to the command, or I've been here. Like, I'm like, have you ever taken our event? He's like, no, I just follow it. I love it. Like, I was stoked to hear you're coming. And then I get to hear some like real world example. This is how I'm able to stay operational in this. Like, that's the shit I live for. But like, you never know. And so I think it's kind of similar to like casting a stone in a pond and you see the ripple effect. I think a lot of people, because of the noise happening today, it's so difficult to cast a stone to do this ripple. Whereas, when we started in 2009, like, even though we thought it was pretty packed, like the amount of noise has exponentially increased every year since then, to the point where, like, even if that were to happen again, we would never be able to recreate this magic.
Yeah. And that's the unique thing about where we are now, because I would say in the last, probably decade, I guess 15 years now, the general individual's knowledge on strength and conditioning has, increased in magnitudes, right? And I don't think the top end has changed much. So now we have a whole bunch of people who 15 years ago wouldn't have gotten the job, who can get the job now because, and you know this, being in that system, it used to be that the tip of the spear was a Division I weight room.
Sure.
Right. And that's the job you wanted. But so often, this is not a knock on it, but this is just how it is. So often you're going to come here, you're going to learn our system, you're going to regurgitate our system, then you're going to be good enough to go get a job somewhere else. And guess what? Because the last 4 years you've been doing that system, what are you going to bring there? You're going to bring that system there, right? Yeah. And that's just how it's worked. And now that's a generalization. Those coaches are also smart and tweak their system along the way. But now we have resources where the general, personal trainer or local coach at the local gym has all these outlets to learn all of this stuff. And so informationally, they rise to the top, but then they still have to have those years of application, because that's the one thing about those big weight rooms is you're going to have 100 dudes come in that you're working with, right? And so you get a lot of touches there. But because that information has risen, now the problem is people are making the minors major, right? The knees over toe guy, like his whole thing is about essentially having a flexible ankle. And he has courses.
Whoa. Nobody squatted knees over toes until that guy came along. Everybody was squatting with a vertical shin. Nobody squatted knee over his toes. Nobody even got their knees over your toes. Even though when you sprint, you have to get your knees over your toes. So, I mean, it's fucking genius marketing. I've heard him say, I really invented this. Like, nobody was getting their knees over their toes before me. And then, the guy's posting all this. I'm like, okay, so you're have incredible dorsiflexion.
Yeah.
And that's great. I mean, I don't know, no athleticism cannot happen without positive shin angle at your knee, at least over your toe. You look at the universal athletic position, right? You're going to have positive shin angle. The knee might be even, but when you sprint and run and change direction, the knee is always going to be over the toe. So the fact that he threw it in the ground and then people like Joe Rogan were like, nobody is doing anything without their knees over their toes. So then I'm going to become the knee. I mean, I fucking saw it. I remember Ruiz and some other people were just like, wait a minute. But it's cool name. It's like,
but that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's his hustle and not knocking the hustle, but that's where we are now and we see it all the time in social media where
so polarizing. Fuck.
In strength and conditioning, there's no new information, right? There are very few people who really have something groundbreaking. Like
Cal Dietz. Like Cal Dietz, I would say. Yeah.
There are a few people who are really out there on the fringes. And the thing about that is because they're on the fringes, half the people think that they're crazy, right? And the problem is because there's nothing really new, the game now is to just repackage. And I, kind of pivot to the nutrition stuff for this, because I would say 90% of the nutrition posts are talking about calories in, calories out, but people are saying it like it's profound. And then it's getting shared like, oh my gosh, did you see this? And it's like, this is basic information. If you took the time to learn the basics.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. And that's the thing. It's like the university, it allows you to learn the basics, but it's just the basics. Then you have to go apply it. And if you're not applying it, you're not going to really be able to become a good coach. You're going to just be really knowledgeable. And the problem there is anything when it's in theory works, right?
Well, theory. I saw the craziest thing yesterday. I was at JITS practice at lunch, and one of the guys who's a brown belt, who's pretty good. I could see him as we were going through the rounds. He was against the wall. I could see him. He was fucking dying. And I walked over by him and I got about 5 feet from him and I caught the big whiff of ketosis, the smell of ammonia.
Oh, I saw you post this on.
I took a big, hit it and I was like, oh. And so as we were lining up, he we always kind of, one of the things I like about jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu or just jiu-jitsu in general is at the end of it, and I did delineate between gringo jiu-jitsu and Brazilians because the Brazilians are big huggers. So at the end, we all hug, which is kind of like dogs flapping their ears. It's how you clear conflict. And as I went to hug, I was like, oh God. And he's like, what? I'm like, dude, eat some fucking carbs. And he's like, what? And I was like, dude, you fucking stink. I can smell it. And I could see him doing this in his mouth. And I'm like, it tastes like you're sucking on pennies. And he's like, oh my God, like I have metal mouth, like it's the most disgusting thing ever, and I'm gassing in this, and I'm like, all right, when you're in ketosis, you got about 20 minutes of glycogen in the muscles. So you're like, this is an hour and a half class, and we just did like 6 rolls, dude, which is 30 minutes, right? I was like, you were gassed in warm-ups. And I can smell the ketosis on you. And he's like, what? And I was trying to explain to him what nutritional ketosis is, and your body's releasing ammonia, like fucking educational on the thing. And the guy's like, oh, so, and then the funny part was he was like, said it, and we got off the mat, I was getting the water. And he's like, dude, my girlfriend has been telling me that I stink. Like I got, like, as soon as I start sweating, I had this weird smell, and she was like harassing him about it. And I'm like, that is you in nutritional ketosis. And he's like, well, and then we started getting into this diet stuff and what he's eating and this. And like the guy was literally fasting, right? So he was eating his first meal. And this isn't a big dude, right? I mean, he's not overweight. He's like kind of, like normal looking. But he's like, yeah, I wasn't eating my first meal till 2. And then I was just eating protein and this. And, maybe like a little bit of carbs late at night when I can, like before bed so I can sleep. And I was like, dude, so wait a minute, your CNS is so fried that the only way you can sleep is a little carbohydrate, and you're basically fasting and only eating protein and fat into nutritional ketosis. Then you're showing up at jiu-jitsu where you're extremely close to people with that fucking level of metal mouth and fucking ammonia in your body, where you're gonna have to burn that fucking gi, and then you're wondering why you're gassing in 20 minutes. And like, I could see like the flutter in his mind, and he's like, man, I like the feeling of focus that I have. I was like, then drink fucking coffee. Yeah, like, dude. It just was funny. And then so then on our group text last night, Victor was hilarious. He's like, nothing like coach giving an impromptu nutrition lecture. Even he said it a little different. I'm like, I'll just paraphrase for him, but he's like, ketosis. And like was kind of like making fun of me, and he's like, can you ever not stop doing this? I'm like, well, yeah, it's just like when I'm doing jiu-jitsu and you stop me, or you tell me to come roll with you because I'm doing something stupid, like you're constantly educating me on being better with jits. I look at it as my job is to like fix people that are making stupid fucking problems, whether it be nutritional ketosis where nobody wants to roll with you because you're the stinky guy, or anything else I see. And I was like, it's the same thing. You're at the airport, you see something there, you see something, you say something.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing, and that's probably why I'm on the education side, not the business side, because that's where I have a lot of problem with some of these folks is like, people don't know what they don't know. And I see it kind of as my job. It's like, hey, if I know it, I should tell you, right? Because I can tell the reality is, and this is what gets me about coaching in general. And I saw it a lot in the CrossFit gyms, especially around town here when I was working in there. So secretive. Like, I don't want to tell you what I'm doing. And it's like, man, the reality is I can tell you exactly what we're doing. I'll tell you what we do to the T. Yeah. But that's going to require you to implement it correctly and also be dynamic enough while you're implementing it, change it on the fly. Because what we have planned and what we do is oftentimes a little bit different. And, and so that's the thing. That's where and that's why I like these, like the online education and things like that, where the university, as much as I love it, did serve as kind of a gatekeeping mechanism to the knowledge. And the fact of the matter is, like you said, not everybody's meant for university, not everybody can afford it and all that kind of stuff. And so by having these other avenues now, it allows the people who truly have the passion to try, it gives them another avenue, right? And maybe it's not the traditional means, maybe it's a little bit of a different route, but I don't enjoy gatekeeping the information, because the information is, one, it's probably going to change in 5 years. Our field is always like, it's circular. So whatever's, cool is going to be cool 10 years later. But I think that's where the university needs to kind of reevaluate, not gatekeeping the information, trying to accelerate that learning curve that they need.
Yeah. Going forward, do you feel that like the large major universities, right? Like, I mean, I know the USCs and the Harvards and these, like, considered like Berkeley have these endowments that are just fucking massive, right? So they have obviously the funds and the space. I mean, like these kind of pieces. I mean, I don't really ever see these falling by the wayside. But what I worry is that people no longer see the value in higher education because it's not relevant to what they want to do. Like, for example, you can go into higher education, or you can just like jump on and create an app. And, like kind of like when I had Vince from V-Shred on the podcast, right?
Yeah.
Knew nothing of strength training. Had a couple buddies that were real good in marketing. They put out an abs program. It burned it up. I mean, we had a killer podcast, but I mean, he had zero education in this, didn't know shit about it, had, new marketing, good looking dude, super fit, made some really viral good stuff. And, they just hit it well. And he built a fucking massive corporation in this unconventional method. Like, there was no education. There was nothing that academia did to help him, other than maybe him going to college and happened to be in the dorms or drinking beers or finding some buddies that all of a sudden later on is like, let's do some shit. Let's sell some fucking ad programs so we can pay for drinks in Vegas. And now they build into this thing where they got, Dr. Drew, pimping their shit.
Yeah.
Which is fucking wild. And, we got into his market. It's not athletes. It's like, 30 to 40-year-old divorcees in the Midwest that are looking to get in shape. Like, he knew his demographics.
It's the dudes who were listening to Loveline when Loveline was a thing. They're still.
I used to sit in my brother's room and we would listen to Dr. Drew on Loveline. And what was crazy was he was doing his, like, I think he was in his doctorate. He was in his 20s. I mean, because now he's in his 60s. I mean, this is a long time ago. I was a little kid, and like we would listen to it, and we'd be like, "What are herpes? What are And like these people would call in, and they'd be like, "I have warts on my dick." And like he would talk them through, oh, you need to go do this and this. I mean, we would sit in there and laugh hysterically. So I mean, Dr. Drew grew up with all of these people, but but that's a situation where this guy probably benefited more from Andrew Tate's Hustler University, because he was able to kind of figure out a niche market, get into this. So I think there's an interesting kind of pivot here in that, ideally not everybody is money driven. And how do I couch this in an interesting way? I think with social media and really just what we see around us is so materialistic that it's this idea that everybody is hustling for every dollar. You're this, the grind, everybody's here and here. It's about what you have and what you don't. And you're not somebody unless you got a Rolex and a Porsche and a Bugatti and this and this. And I think that is unrepresentative of a lot of maybe everybody, that there are still people that like the knowledge is what's important, and being able to educate and learn. And there's still a piece on this. I just don't know if it's as sexy or if it's as cool as it once was. I mean, there was an idea that I was going to go to university, I was going to become educated, and it was going to allow me to do something. Whereas for my dad, he always said, if you do something you love, and I always hate that one where it's like, you do something you love, you never work a single day. Yeah. What he loved about the law was that it was ever changing, and it was forcing him to continue to learn. And he was so paranoid about being bored, because I guess when he was 16, he had a job at the McDonnell Douglas plant, and he worked on a drill press. And all day he just fucking worked the drill press. And I guess there was a guy next to him that had been on the drill press for 30 years. Jeez. Every day he just came in and drilled holes. And like my dad was like so scared that 30 years would go by and he was still doing drill pressing. So his thought of like getting into something that was forcing him to have to learn and find new ways to do things, and was always evolving, and the law is always changing. So for him, it was what allowed him to stay young. I mean, he practiced right up until he passed away. I mean, last case, was on the 16th, and he was gone, 2.5 months later. But that feeling of continuing to learn, whereas if your entire goal is just chasing a dollar, does it really matter if you're educated or learning, as long as you can hustle and get that dollar and use somebody else's system? I mean, I guess that's just finding, new application ways to do it, but like there's still no pursuit of higher education and learning.
Yeah, well, it goes back to like mastering your craft, right? What is your craft? If your craft is sales, then it doesn't matter what you're selling, right? And sales, I don't know, not for me, right? But I think it's about, and you and I have talked about this offline before, but it's like having kids, right? Your story is going to continue, and it's kind of the same thing in this field. It's like if you are looking to just make money, then you're not really worried about what your story is going to be in the end, right? Because nobody's really going to remember you. You're going to make what you want. They're going to get that transaction from you, but you're not going to be foundational in their development. And, I think with the social media and gathering the following and trying to get the interaction and stuff, I think people forget, it's called the enmity paradox. The more followers you have, you also have more enemies, right? Or more people who don't want to be a follower, and more people working against you, essentially. And so if the chase is to get as many followers as possible, then you're going to attract a whole bunch of noise along the way. But if the desire that you have is to become the best that you can, people will follow you because they'll see you as kind of like a beacon in whatever it is. And so you'll still get people to, you're talking about Jesus earlier. People will spread the word, but you're not necessarily going out telling them like, hey, this is the word to spread. Well,
So what I'm fearful of is people not being educated to the point to discern information in intelligent and constructive ways. Let's give you an example. Mark Zuckerberg recently goes on Joe Rogan. He painted a narrative which is complete fucking horse shit.
His bow hunting one?
No, everything on that fucking podcast was complete fucking horse shit. And I'm a little disappointed too that, Joe Rogan, who I have a ton of respect for, a fucking badass podcast. The fact that he didn't call Zuckerberg on all this fucking nonsense, that he was, Zuckerberg's like, we did this, and then all of a sudden the government started coming at us, and then he was trying to pretend that the banking people that were coming at him, he didn't know why. We're not a bank, we're a social media platform. Well, he tried to have a currency. I mean, the amount of bullshit that he spit on that podcast was fucking ridiculous. Like he's in China and, asks Xi Jinping, the head of the, CCP, that he's going to name his child after him. I mean, Zuckerberg has a fucking, his goal is to make a lot of money, and he has no ethics, right? I don't care, but he goes on Rogan. He plays the long game. He goes on Rogan, he plays a victim and this, and now all of a sudden I'm this good guy. We're getting rid of DEI. I mean, we're doing this, we're going this. And, he's over there with his fucking broccoli hair, and he's wearing a black shirt with a chain, and he does jits and this. It's all very contrived. And if Rogan would have been a little more educated on all of this stuff, he should have fucking called him on it. And so, I'll just give so I'm watching this, and I'm like, this is fucking nonsense. So I go back and do a bunch of just kind of a little bit of searching in this, and kind of fact checked all this stuff. And then I jumped on Breaking Points, which had an incredible fucking breakdown where they just lambasted fucking that podcast and all the bullshit that Mark Zuckerberg was pushing out. So all of a sudden, I see a social media post from Gordon Ryan, who's considered the best no-gi grappler in the world, who's here in Austin, and he's been super prickly about fuck Zuck, and he's a piece of shit and a Zionist and all this shit. And now all of a sudden he puts this whole thing about I listened to Rogan on, or I listened to Zuckerberg on Rogan, and he's a good guy, and this is the government. I mean, fucking 180s. Right, to the point where now all of a sudden Zuck's a good guy and he does shit, and I'm like, holy shit, this fly trap caught the morons. And the fact that here's this guy has a huge social media platform, and a bunch of grown men laudering over this guy's ability to wrestle men in spandex. Now all of a sudden this guy who was pro America, pro Trump, and Zuck's against us. Now all of a sudden, one podcast where Zuck's able to play a little bit of a victim, and he's a smart fucking dude. He knew exactly what he was doing in spinning all this and the narrative and all this other bullshit, and going on Rogan, and now all of a sudden here, I mean, this whole thing is contrived. I'm seeing this happening, and as an intelligent, person who, as a rhetoric major, we got into disinformation campaigns, and I read a lot, and I know how this thing's played. For me to look and be like, this is bullshit, and more importantly, the fact that he was able to catch people in this fly trap. Sure enough, Gordon Ryan posts this stuff, and I'm just like, God damn, there's a situation where that dude did not go to college. He went to high school, and he's a grappler, and he makes a ton of money selling informational jiu-jitsu DVDs on BJJ fanatics, and he's a great grappler, and ADCC, and has probably made a ton of money, but he has a huge platform, and Zuck caught somebody who's extremely uneducated, who has a big voice and a big following. And I'm looking at this and being like, if I was in this guy's circle, I'd been like, yo, man, slow your roll. Like, this is bad deal, dude. Like, you can't be manipulated because this is going to make you look dumb. Or maybe he just doesn't care. Maybe it's the polarizing at the moment. Maybe I don't understand how to play the game and he does. But the problem is, that stuff doesn't go away. As I've told my kids numerous times, with social media and everything that's going on in the world, if you do something stupid, like, I don't know, take a nudie pic and send it to somebody or do this, like, everybody's going to see it. Your grandma's going to see it. You're going to be here. I mean, there's a lot of people that do dumb stuff, but I just, I think for one of the early complaints when I was in college is that the way that they were able to oppress people was by keeping knowledge from them. Mm-hmm. So there was this kind of feeling that if we make knowledge attainable to everybody, it'll raise the level and no longer will we have oppression. Well, knowledge is endless, and it's literally at everybody's fingertips, that the information is so accessible that it wasn't the gatekeeping of information that was making people dumb.
Yeah.
It was laziness, stupidity, or the lack of critical thinking in education, which is the function of higher education. Whereas, you get in there and you go in, like we were talking about, you go into different classes, you sit with people that don't look like you, that don't come from places with you, that maybe speak with an accent, that maybe don't, that all of a sudden you come together and you hear somebody's different perspective and you hear this and you basically exchange, you read books, you get all this information and you start formulating your own thoughts after a while. Mm-hmm. And, you're just not regurgitating Gornwood and, next thing you know, like we talked about Good Will Hunting, but you actually start doing some thinking on your own, and that helps you so that when you get out into the world and you hear something that you're like, you know what, this is playing into my bias. Like that's the, like I'm, this sounds right to me because this informational bias, like this is my cultural bias, like all these things play into it. And I want this to be true, but I also know that I have to take emotion out of this. And even though this sounds right, and this sounds like something that like I want it to be true, I have to go back and look and say, am I being manipulated by people more intelligent than me? It's like listening to the news of this and all this other stuff and podcasts and all these other things and realizing that you just become, and I gave this talk at Sornex, that I believe the reason that most of the world feels unauthentic and disingenuous is that nobody actually thinks for themselves anymore. All they do is regurgitate ideas that they try on like clothes at the store, right? What they do, and just to some extent, there's value in it, right? Like I don't know what to think, so I'm going to try on somebody else's ideas for a little bit, and then I'm going to kind of get my own. But the problem is, in today's deal, all we end up doing is putting on coats of like, okay, this is Joe Rogan's idea. I like Joe Rogan. I'm going to wear Joe Rogan's coat. And that the reason that it feels disingenuous is that nothing of what we say or do is actually our own beliefs. All we're doing is trying on other people's shit. And the reason that you read and the reason that you go to school and the reason that you go into higher education and you get into these situations, and I am forever grateful, I wanted to say for you and Hunter Waldman, our Tux exchanges and kind of this little roundtable we have is constantly forcing me to think, because you guys are intelligent. I like to believe I am too. But also putting us in a situation where you have unique ideas and that you're not just regurgitating people's shit. Because what I see on social media, and I know we make the joke on creatine posts, but like all people are doing is they're looking at other people's information, they're trying it on and then regurgitating it as their own. And the reason that it feels fucking inauthentic and disingenuous and fucking nonsense is because it's not theirs. They don't have an opinion on it. They just think it sounds cool and will give them credibility. And, that Gordon Ryan thing, which was really fascinating to me because I was like, God, I've seen this guy talk shit on Zuck endlessly, but not for any reason that was actually true. It was more like Zuck shadow banned me. I'm like, do you really think that he's sitting up there like king of the castle? I'm going to shadow ban this fucking guy. No, he's got fucking tens of thousands of people working for him with different directives. And the fact that you get shadow banned was probably because you had an Instagram story with a dick pic, like it's just, it goes into the fucking algorithm. And then this guy does this fucking epically long thing about Zuck's, this and this. And I'm like, so you guys are telling me in today's world that a 78-year-old billionaire flanked by soon to be a trillionaire Elon Musk and another billionaire Mark Zuckerberg, these are the guys that are going to cross the bridge to save the world from all of these things that these billionaires who, nobody talks about all Trump's dealings in the Middle East and all this other stuff. I mean, never has a president been more compromised financially because of his previous business dealings. I mean, Jimmy Carter sold his peanut farm because he didn't want any confusion about and anybody to influence him as a president through business or whatnot. But yet Trump has literally hundreds of millions. I mean, it was Jared Kushner got a $2 billion loan from the Middle East for real estate developments. I mean, we have this like extremely thing. They're bringing Elon Musk in, who's built his entire corporation on government subsidies, and he's going to be the guy with Doge, with his secret department that's going to figure out how we get rid of wasteful spending in the government. Like, I'm looking at this and I'm like, you have to fucking be kidding, right? But then the other problem is you couldn't vote for the other guy, right? So you had a walking potato who's 6 years senile. You have Kamala Harris, who never won the primary and has the IQ slightly above the gum in my shoe, and is the most disingenuous fucking people on the planet. Did you hear the deal where, when they were going to do aid and they sent her out there to take that photo op at the C-10 of all that shit, and then they just basically took her away, unloaded it, and never sent the stuff? I mean, the amount of fucking like dishonesty in this thing is fucking legendary. But the problem is that if you're not educated and you're not smart, or you don't at least have somebody to call who's way fucking smarter than you, and like, you have to be better than this. And but then again, like, we fail at the margins of our experience, and that's like the level of his experience. But the fact that this guy has a platform to put this information out is fucking beyond me. And I saw it, and I'm just using this as an example. Like, this is why I went to Berkeley. This is why I sat and listened to Bob Woodward and listened to all this. And this is why I read and do these things, so that I can discern this information and be intelligent to be like, is this confirmation bias? You know what? Just because I want it to be true doesn't make it true. So now I got to go. And you know what? Here's the problem. There is no good and bad, right? There's no degrees at this. Everybody's dishonest and honest. You just have to decide what information is relevant and what allows you to sleep at night.
Well, and when you are, just being a parrot, you better hope that you never get pressed, right? Because that's the thing. And I love a little bit of verbal pugilism, right?
As I know you do. And the problem is that, I'm not going to shit on anybody in the past here, but there were certain people with the verbal pugilism that would just be like, shut down. Yeah. And that was frustrating for me, where I was like, if you want to fucking spar, let's spar. Yeah. And that's beneficial.
Because the thing is, if I have a unique idea, or I've developed my idea, even if it's built off other individuals, right? I developed that idea. So if you ask me, you could be poking all the holes in it, but I should be able to at least say, well, I think because of this, right? Well, because of this is why I came up with that. The problem is when these people just consume it and regurgitate it, you press them, and it's just like, it goes to the extreme. Oh, well, you must be that's the what's that called? The hyperbole, and I mean that's not even the right word, but it's everything. Ad hominem?
Yeah. The ad hominem talk is a personal attack, but it's there's a form of this where basically what you do is, if anybody challenges you on anything, you basically take it back to this, like, your personal attack of me, right? Like, no. This information is agnostic of whether or not I like you. I'm just discerning the information, whether or not it's bullshit or not. You as a person could be a piece of shit or the greatest person. It's like, I get into this with my wife constantly, right? I love my wife. I love the mother of my children. I think she's an intelligent, fucking strongest, most badass person on the planet. Do we get into some social discussions on like different parameters on this thing? And like, to the point where my kids are like, I can't believe you guys are married. You guys are so far apart on this stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't believe that there's a boogie. Well, I think there are. This is interesting. I had John McPhee on the podcast, and there were some things offline that John McPhee said to me that I can't get out of my mind. One is, no, I mean, it's true. So I've kind of always believed that, like, what we see in the world, whether it be like let's call it generally like evil, right? Like people that are acting in their best interest at like the detriment of other people, right? Like, I know the building is going to fall down, but I'm going to like race out ahead of time. And then when the people die, I'm going to be able to file an insurance thing, kind of like that kind of nefarious type shit, whether you think about like 9/11, I mean, like, well, whatever it looks like, right? They always paint these nefarious pictures. That Mark Zuckerberg's secretly over there doing whatever he's doing. And, like up there, like evil people like Elon Musk, right? Like super villains. So I've always believed that like there was greed involved, that people like become emotionally broken, and this greed, the need for more is like a driver. I've believed that like maybe people are like abused when they're young, sexually this, and they get a bad head full of wiring, and then they want to extend it onto people, or whatever it is, right? So like I always felt that there was like a psychological reason for the things that people do that either stem from past experiences, childhood, whatever it is, all right? That which is kind of the sociological thing. As you know, I'm a Jordan Peterson fan, and what's wild to me is after being a clinical psychologist and psychiatrist for 30, 40 years, whatever he's been, and taught all over the world, the fact that he's gone this hard into the Bible as the answer for everything really just tweaks me a little bit. Yeah. And not like in a good way or a bad way, but just like, wow, after everything you saw, the only way that you could answer these questions wasn't through Sigmund Freud or this, it was actually through the Bible. But
yeah, it's peculiar. Yeah.
What John McPhee and I talked about is good and evil. That he's like, I'm not a religious person, but what I saw in the Middle East and what I saw happening to the, that these people did and the things that we came across, the only way I could couch it and the only way I could make sense of it is there's like demons and evil that express themselves in people. And it's literally like good, like it's like good versus evil, the oldest battle of time, that there's angels and demons kind of a deal. And I'm like biblical stuff. And he's like, yeah, he's like, it's the only way it makes sense. It doesn't make sense any other way. Like, how could you do this to people? How could you act this way? Like, how could you feel empowered if it wasn't? And shit, man, like that was really impactful. And like, I've thought about that a bunch because that dude's as straight a shooter as you want. I mean, like we were sitting there and it's funny, when I was out at DevGru, we were sitting at the table kind of talking with all the guys, and they asked me, they were like, how was McPhee? And I was like, he's a bro. If he was here right now, he'd be doing jits with us. He'd be right in the middle of this. Like, he's a legit bro. Like, you guys would love him. He'd cut it up. He's funny. He's pretty good at jits. He wants to lift weights. He's a great dude. He's a bro. Now you can say, and this is what I love about the special operations community. Everybody's like, oh, well, I'm at DevGru and he's at Delta and this and this. And I'm like, I don't have any ability to tell you whether or not these stories are true. Like, it's like me, like you asking me football stories. Like, one of the guys at DevGuru was like huge Baltimore Ravens fan. He's like, what was it like playing against Ray Lewis? And I was like, oh, I loved playing against Ray Lewis. He's like, what? Why? I'm like, because he never wanted to hit an offensive lineman. If you notice, every one of Ray's highlights is him hitting a tight end or a running back. Right? If you ever see him go against like a big fucking fullback or an offensive lineman, no, that's why he had those big mutants in front of him. He had Saragusa and those other fat asses. So he could just hide and scrape in this. But if you ever see him one-on-one with a lineman or like a big tight end like Gronk, like they fucking put a hurting on him. So I liked playing against him. And I was telling him a story about we were running a little inside zone and Ray scooted over and I got him one-on-one, kind of came out kind of real like nervous that he was going to like fucking juke me, fucking got underneath him and fucking pancaked him. We had a nice run. And so I was like, I really liked playing against him. It was just getting to Ray Lewis was the hard part. And then the problem is if he made a big play, he was going to be like, oh, all the fucking drama. And it was like telling this dude that, Santa Claus didn't exist. He was like crushed by it. And I remember being like, dude, I know the pageantry. You're a Baltimore Ravens fan. Fucking Ray Lewis is their fucking guy. I mean, they brought him out for the playoff game.
Yeah.
And he did his thing. He's been retired for years. He's in the Hall of Fame. Like, I love it. I mean, his longevity is incredible. But, like that's a story that's unique to me. Now, whether or not you want to believe it or not, like the only person that's going to be able to tell you whether or not I'm full of shit or not was, Runyon or some of the guys I played with who knew exactly. So there's only a few people in the world that could be like, oh, yeah, no, that's full of shit. Like you're legit. So that's what I view with like the special operations and Delta and the guys who worked at, in that situation with these stories. But all I can do is judge an individual based upon the character at which I know him, which is he showed up, we did a podcast, we hung out, he came and trained with me at Power Athlete. I've been helping him with his programming, getting him ready for JITS. He's going to go and do World Masters and Purple Belt. And, like text me like New Year's Eve's funny memes. He's in our chat group for the Brazilians. And just great fucking, like a good bro. Just like all the dudes that we train, that we work with at DevGuru are all good fucking dudes. And, we've worked over the years with like, guys like, Hendo, maybe if he's listening to the podcast, or Shirley, Andy Stumpf, all good dudes. But then what's so fascinating is you're sitting there with those guys, and because their tip of the spear is so sharp, that people that aren't in their tip of the spear, they're like Sean Ryan, for example. Sean Ryan I think he did 2 platoons or, 2 deployments or what. And yet, you got, Mel Gibson on Joe Rogan talking about, these, tier 1 guys, those guys, but then I'm sitting there at the table and they were like, shit, dude, those guys weren't tier 1 guys. But yet Rogan doesn't know that. Mel Gibson doesn't know that. So it's like kind of this, like you fail at the margins of your experience. And belaboring to get back to what I'm fucking talking about is the same thing in higher education. Like, I know if somebody's educated, I know if they've been through some traditional means where now they can provide information, be able to discern it in such a way. And I know that when talking to people, if they haven't been educated and they haven't read what I had and they haven't gone through this and they didn't have, like, what you're saying where, like, this is important to me, and being smart and being educated. And as I explained to my daughters, going to school, the information's important, but the real value is teaching you how to think and how to approach life, and more importantly, how to discern information, because there's never been a time in this world where disinformation and bullshit is so rampant, and the only armor that you have and the only fucking weaponry that you have is your ability to critically think and listen and be like, that sounds like bullshit. Let me dig a little bit deeper. This is confirmation bias, and I need to avoid this. So I think what belabored in this story is trying to get back to me, while traditional education in these, huge centers of learning on ivory tower hills might feel passe to, the hustler university and the people that are just trying to score a dollar. But I feel that those universities will never be more important today as they are going forward, that the ability to put intelligent people in a place to teach young people how to critically think and not just fucking vomit nonsense based on podcasts. Like, this is where the value is. And so when my daughters, we had a talk, and I talked to them all the time about going to college, and they're like, do I need to, like, they've never said this to me, but they kind of made a point, like, is college still going to exist? And is it going to be like you and this? And I'm like, your goal to go to school is for you to become educated in how to think, how to read, how to process information, how to discern it, and how to be able to do these things, so that you're not a fucking dumb fuck who ends up like Gordon Ryan, who listens to one podcast by an extremely smart dude who's over there basically providing information to Joe Rogan to manipulate the audience that's listening, to basically create an image that he wants to put together that probably close to 100 people crafted in a focus group before he went out there. And you don't get caught in that fly trap looking like an idiot.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. That's what keeps me up at night, is making sure that my girls, I think maybe it's a father of daughters thing too, where it's just like, don't get fucked. Not like literally, but like,
well, figuratively and literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just like, you got it. Like, dudes can get away with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I got away with a lot of stuff, but it's like, as they grow, it's like, you guys got to be fucking sharp.
Oh,
like, you got to be sharp.
Dude,
and so
I've told the girls, boys are extremely good at wasting time.
Yeah.
And they could be manipulative and they can sweet talk. The only thing that you have to remember is, one, boys are incredible time wasters and they're master manipulators. I'm like, You think women are good manipulators? You give a dude like, and the way they work their way in is just like, it's like mold. They just get a little bit of wet like this, it's this and this, and next thing you know, it grows. And, the part of the other thing too is girls that grow up with a stable father figure in the house who's educated, who talks to them, and even though it's I'll not be pull any punches, it's interesting raising 13-year-old twin girls, but like me every day when I drop them off, I joke, I'm like, I was like, Daddy loves you. And then as they're walking away, I roll the window down. I'm like, make good choices. And they all look back and give me dirty looks because their friends are probably like, what the fuck is that guy saying? I'm like, make good choices. Daddy loves you. Remember, Daddy's love's the only one you need. You guys are smart, but raising intelligent, strong, capable women is extremely difficult, especially in the land of, OnlyFans and, nothing but, ass photos. And I'm always a little nervous too when I click on my Instagram because I do hang out with the Brazilians and a lot of dudes. And like for some, oh my God, all of a sudden I get like big butted Brazilian girls on my feed. And I'll be like, they're like, look, like, what are you looking at? I'm like, it's not me. It's Arash. It's Victor. It's Philippe, dude. They're looking at big butted girls. It's not me. I'm not mad about it, mind you. But the desire to educate, to not just impart information, but teach them how to think, like that should be the goal. And, recently on our Discord, somebody brought up and asked about podcasts, like which podcast you guys listening to. And I do listen to Rogan if he has an interesting guest on. I do like Chris Williamson if he's got interesting guests. I mean, I don't listen to podcasts because I follow this podcast. I listen to the podcast because they have an interesting guest that I want to be educated in. Like I can't listen to Brett Kreischer and that Two Bears, One Cave thing. Like listening to him squeal like a little girl in excitement, listening to Matthew McConaughey talk about making fucking tuna fish sandwiches. Yeah. I would have literally just walked into traffic and got hit. And he's like, what's up? Like he's freaking out. I'm like, really? You have this big a man crush that this guy can talk about making tuna fish and you're going to get excited like a third, like I like beside me. This is the world we live in where tuna fish goes viral because Matthew McConaughey puts wasabi in there and you get Brett Kreischer fucking squealing like I've never seen it. It's a weird world we live in. And I know it's 2:00, so we probably got to get rolling, but, dude, this has been an awesome podcast. I'm bummed that we don't get to see each other in person more often, even though we do get to see each other at the collective. But I feel like because we text and we talk so much that it feels very natural. But yeah, dude, hopefully you'll be out here soon enough and we can crank some stuff when we get a little bit of downtime.
Yeah, I think 2025 is going to be speaking of education, I think it'll be a good year for the education side.
Awesome. Well, if people want to follow you, they want any information, what is it? Skutnik Performance, I think, is the handle.
Yeah, Skutnik Performance. But I really, again, because I'm not good at business, I don't really use that. So my personal one is just Ben Skutnik on Instagram, and you'll probably get a lot of not as interesting as Gordon Ryan stuff. Maybe
no, it's good. I do appreciate it, but yeah, that Gordon Ryan one still blows my mind. I don't know him. I met him one time, but. I wish he had somebody around him who was a little sharper to kind of couch him a little bit, but to each their own. He's a rock star. He's better at jits than I am. So awesome. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by kofi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.